All right, making our way down to the finale, quite literally on the road to the Red Wedding with Season 3, Episode 7, entitled The Bear and the Maiden Fair. Pat, I know you wrote it down, so let's hear it. What's your joke for this one?
Hey, I think the Talkin TV family here can agree with me that this is all about the sadists and the favorite toy. This episode is the moment we've been cringing towards.
It is the moment we've been cringing for, indeed.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Theon does not really make it out in the same shape he was at the start of this episode.
Well, what is it that Ramsay says? He's not. He is showing him mercy. He pulls the same shit that Joffrey did. He's like, "I'm not killing you. I'm just making a few alterations," I think is what he said. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. All right, Pat, Season 3, Episode 7. We're officially past the halfway point, and we're almost done with Season 3. 3 whole seasons of this show. Almost going to be... I've already forgotten. When did we even start the show? It was going to be... What was it? It was back in April, I think. Like, right around, like, the 10-year anniversary, right? Was when we started, and I pitched this whole idea to you. And here we are, almost done with Season 3.
Yeah, I have no idea, Dom. Like, it feels like... like the time, the before times.
Do you feel like what's her name, Gloria Stewart in Titanic, and that infamous Titanic meme where she's like, "It's been so long," and she's like decrepit and like 100 years old.
Yeah, it's really. I think the thing that's interesting is when I started, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to watch every episode week to week. And then when it really fired up in Season 2 with Tyrion and all those plot lines that I enjoyed, I just started like watching like, oh, okay, this week I'll watch like 2 episodes. And then the next week it's like, oh, God, I'm going to watch 3 episodes. Yep. And then I went into like full binge mode. And, I think I'm in like Season 8 somewhere on my personal binge, and then so it's one of those things where this show definitely gets addicting. I think when it first started, when they produced it, they were doing the week by week thing, and I think by the end of it, when they get to Season 6, 7, and 8, I think they were thinking more of the binge, like streaming, because those last seasons that we kind of criticize, if you binge watch them back to back to back, they don't seem as bad as they did when you were watching them week to week.
Absolutely. It's kind of insane how that works, right? And I think that always needs to be taken into consideration whenever you're watching any show is the context in which it is meant to be viewed. Where, again, we talked about this, right, with the difference in pacing as the show continued, because this show came out on like the transition point between like kind of the prestige TV era and the, more quick rapid fire streaming era, where the first couple seasons very slow, very deliberately paced. You could kind of get the best of both worlds, whether you binged it or if you watched it week to week, although week to week it was definitely more slow, more deliberate, but it made the payoff feel more interesting. But you're absolutely right, where the last couple seasons, because of how fast they move, and you're right, because literally when I binged the whole final season last year, I don't remember, at some point, I think it was just because I was bored. I was already like kind of starting to have the thoughts of Talking Thrones in my head kind of before I pitched the idea to you. I was like, wow, all these last 6 episodes kind of batch and bundle together. They don't really feel as bad as they did week to week back in 2019 when I watched them initially. So that's an interesting point that you bring up. And I definitely think that this episode and this season, Season 3, is like the crux of that, because I think that Season 3 is like the last season where we truly have that like deliberately paced like week to week model before they go into full blown like then not quite spectacle mode, but like Season 4 is a lot like Season 2 in the sense that there's a lot happening and there's a lot of action happening in every episode before we get to Season 5, where they're just like, boom, full on spectacle,
Yeah, I think Season 4, and we'll talk about this when we get there, but Season 4 is when the production value starts to increase a lot. It's still good here in Season 3, but, you're just going to notice a huge difference. It's more of a spectacle. We get to see, I think, more of the battles. We get to start watching, these significant action sequences. I think it all starts in season 4 and really extends into 5, in the later seasons.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I also wanted to take note before we actually dove into this episode that this episode, it's the first of 4 directed by Michelle MacLaren. She directed this episode and the next episode, and then she directed episodes 4 and 5 of next season, Oathkeeper and First of His Name. And she gets note for being the only female director on the entire show. I was gonna make a note that like, oh, she's the first female director, and then I just realized I'm like, oh wait, no, she's the only female director of the entire show. What I think is kind of impressive and definitely interesting, especially given that she's got a long career on her name. She's directed some of the best episodes of some incredible episodes of Breaking Bad, a lot of other shows. I think that she directed a few episodes of Mad Men, but I might need to check on that. I don't know if because that show was just wrapping up right when she was starting to come on the scene. But I definitely think it's really interesting where this episode feels to me a lot more laid back, let's call it. It's definitely another character-focused episode, but it's not character focused in the way that like episode 7, A Man Without Honor, last season was, where it's more so characterized. So last episode, The Climb, was more so characterized around like a big spectacle event that kind of set the metaphorical and literal tone of the episode. But this episode, it's much more so kind of about, right, like kind of certain characters like kind of reckoning with where they're at, other characters kind of transitioning on to where they would go into the next episode. Like a lot of that they usually save for like the finale, but I feel like that really starts here, right? Where obviously, Theon goes through a tremendous change in this episode. Arya, is kind of shuttled off to the next stage of her journey, obviously with her abduction by the Hound, where she spends for the next couple of episodes. This episode also kind of solidifies Jaime and Brienne's relationship ultimately when he comes back to save her from the bear pit. Obviously, a big portion of this episode is devoted to Jon and Ygritte's relationship back and forth. So I find that really interesting, kind of how she takes to approach this episode. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that before we dive in?
I think my thought is like I enjoyed pretty much most of the scenes here in this episode. I'm not going to lie here. Watching the Ramsay Bolton Theon scene really gets me every time. Yeah. It's heartbreaking to just see how sadistic Ramsay is, and this is the first time we really see that, like how bad he is. Like, okay, yeah, he cut off Theon's finger before he sort of like screwed some bolts into his feet, so he is like sort of so he's sort of maiming him throughout this torture sequence anyway. But like now we get to this whole idea of the favorite toy and how he's going to make some mild alterations. It's this is where we realize that Ramsay, there is no limit to his sadism.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that, like I said, it's funny because I always see that, like, because I've watched a lot of HBO shows, and it's funny, I see a lot of, like, the similarities between, like, the shows. I definitely know the, like, few alterations line is definitely something that they pulled directly from The Sopranos, because I definitely remember a scene in season 1 where I think it's a scene where Tony's, like, stapling, using the stapler gun on the one guy, Mikey, and you see him, like, stapling his jacket to him and, like, pumping it full of staples, and he's like, oh, what's the matter? A few alterations, And so I definitely see, like, a lot of the similarities here, but, opening scene, we open up. We spent a decent amount of time in the north this episode, obviously, because Jon and his journey with the wildlings. They initially climbed the wall. They're in the north now.
The opening of this episode is great. It's them taking use of the week to week, right? So the last episode we saw them climb to the top, and you have this like romantic kiss between Ygritte and Jon. And basically now, fade up on this episode, and they're basically walking away from the wall on the other side, and it's a nice jump cut.
Yes.
We don't have to spend too much more time showing them at the wall. They've already moved on, and they're already sort of invading the north. And that's something that Jon brings up almost right away, right? It's like, people beyond the wall have tried 6 times and they failed all 6 times. And this is number 7 and it's not going to be any different, right?
Yeah.
That's his main point that he brings up right off the bat.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this whole sequence, the way it kind of plays out, right? It's not really plot heavy, but it is definitely very character focused. Where you have John and his couple of other interactions with the wildlings. Aurel obviously still criticizing him, not trusting him, obviously. But the thing that I like is that Aurel, some of Aurel's personal motivations are revealed here, where it's very clear that he is in love with Ygritte and that he's kind of using that as more of motivation. The fact that he's jealous of John as well, but also the fact that he knows that like Ygritte's still a wildling and he knows that John isn't. And obviously you have the funny bit with Tormund, obviously. But I think you are right in bringing that up, in that I think it's interesting where, again, it shows that like John's kind of, John's vows have obviously been put to the test this entire time, but how his feelings for Ygritte are starting to come up and poke his head, where he comes out to her and says, it's like, look, 6 times, I grew up in the North. I grew up on stories of the wildlings invading. And it's like, and I'm more than familiar of that, even to an extent before I joined the Night's Watch. And he also, now that he spent all this time with them and he's gotten to know them well as a people, right? He feels for them. He really, really does in some sense. Not necessarily Aurel, but like people like Ygritte and Tormund, where he definitely feels for the fact that they are fighting for probably the most just cause of any of the kingdoms, where they're not fighting for any sort of like personal goal of anything. They're just literally fighting to survive. And the fact that they are constantly, on the losing side because of both the resources that they have available and just based off the fact that they're not the most disciplined people, like John sees that and he feels for them, definitely. And he tries to warn Ygritte, both obviously because of the care that he's come to know for the wildlings, but also because of his personal feelings and attachment for her. And she does kind of throw it back in his face in the usual manner, but at the same time, there's also a little bit of a slip up here where he says, what's it called, all of you, and she kind of corrects him and is like, all of us, where it's like,
yeah, well, that goes to the notion where, that she brought up before, where it's like, they don't really care about us. The Night's Watch doesn't care about you. Mance Rayder doesn't care about me. We're just, pawns in the army. And, it's one way or another, it's going to lead to them, being killed. And the fact is, like, John's a part of this, whether, he still kind of thinks in that way of like, he's, part of Winterfell and the Night's Watch. They're the wildlings beyond the wall. Like, he's still talking about, that separation, but at the same time, it's like, I think Ygritte is saying that we're all in this together. It's like our fates are sort of tied, and specifically bringing up the fact that, they should be doing whatever it takes for each other, as, a couple that is sort of committed to this, budding relationship, which we actually get to see a lot of that sort of sprout in this episode. The whole swooning, the wearing of silk dresses.
Yeah, her reaction to the windmill when she sees that was just priceless. That whole interaction, I love that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, Winterfell has towers, 3 times that windmill, and you'll basically be swooning when you see it. And he has to explain to her, like, what that means and like what women are like in Winterfell. And, she definitely kind of listens, hears him, makes jokes, but also proves to him that, she's really never going to be that type of woman.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, the two of them kind of deepen their relationship here in this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an episode all about relationships, ultimately, I find, for better or for worse in this episode. As we see, briefly, we check in with Bran's crew, obviously, as with our couple stops in the North. Like I said, we spent a decent amount of time in the North, and this is probably my favorite scene with Bran in this entire season, just in general.
Yeah, you mean the scene where Osha basically is like, "Oh, don't listen to his fake news. He's filling your mind with
but the whole
bad
thing
ideas."
The whole thing is we finally learn Osha's entire motivation as a character and just in general. It's funny because in the books it was much more so laced in. Like, she was dropping a lot more hints to Bran. Obviously, even going all the way back to season 1, or in this case, the first book, where she's telling him, like, you need to tell your brother he's marching his armies the wrong way, just in general. But this is where we finally find out, because the whole thing that's happening here, it's been very underplayed, because the scenes that we've been spent with Bran this season are, like I said, are very, very much underplayed. There's not a whole lot. When they do happen, they're very, like, kind of jokey back and forth. You're like, oh, Osha's arguing with Mira over who kills rabbits better or something, while Jojen and Bran are kind of having all these weird vision stuff that we don't see a lot of. But this is the episode that officially establishes it, which is that Osha thinks that they've been doing this one thing, which is that they've been heading to the wall in order to get Bran to Jon for safety. Well, now Bran reveals that he's been kind of concocting this other plan with Jojen behind the scenes, where Jojen is the first person that he's met that actually understands his green seer abilities, almost in a way kind of replacing Osha, because Osha was really the only person that he could talk to beforehand about the dreams that didn't talk down to him like a child. And now you've got Jojen replacing her. And now Jojen has revealed that Bran needs to go not just to the wall, but north of the wall in order to find the three-eyed raven, who he believes is somewhere beyond the wall. And Osha recants to them like a vision of it's like, okay, well, you guys are off living in fantasy land right here. This is what's actually north of the wall. And she recounts them this story.
Right, yeah, she was living at, in her hut, I guess, and her husband basically went missing, and she believed, in her heart that he was still alive, and one day he came in, pretty much describes him as
White.
A White Walker and or a zombie, whatever it is. But he kind of came, and it's very graphic the way she describes. Like he squeezed her neck, and she felt the life kind of leaving, and she stabbed the dagger into his heart, and he didn't seem to mind much. And she kind of skips the story around a little bit and ends with like, "Oh, I had to burn my hut," and it's like I knew that moment. I didn't have to think or ponder or anything. I just knew that beyond the wall was no place for humans anymore, and that's why she fled below the wall. And it's a great performance. I would say it's one of those scenes where we took the time to really dive deep into this character's backstory, and it's believable, and it really helps set us up for the dangers that are going to continue to increase, beyond the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another one of those terrific one-shot, one-character monologues that Game of Thrones was so well known for, and it's brilliantly delivered, and really one of the last great performances that Natalia Tena would have on the show, because famously, she's only got a couple more episodes. Her character, along with R. Parkinson's Rickon, famously leaves after the infamous Red Wedding episode, The Reigns of Castamere, and is not seen again until season 6, when she's probably brought back and, gets killed probably quickly, which I think is a good transition point.
So what are they doing that whole time, right?
Good question. It's a good. Well, if we're led to believe as to what happened by the books is that she took Rickon to this weird island called Skagos, which could have been filled with cannibals. That was another one of those storylines that was set up by the last book that was released in Game of Thrones in the Game of Thrones books that promptly was forgotten by the show, and it just revealed they were just tromping around somewhere on the north for like 3 seasons until they got caught by the Umbers of all people.
I feel like if Game of Thrones was a video game, this would be like the $30 DLC. You would see the adventure of Osha and Rickon and what they did, and you would have to kind of pay per view. I feel
like let's be honest. I feel like at this point, like you could write like an entire season of television just based off of all the storylines that were just cut from Game of Thrones. I'm talking like a full 10 episode season where each episode you would see like what happened to each of the storylines they abandoned. Like one episode with Dario ruling Meereen, one episode with Osha and Rickon just wandering around the north, one episode with the Blackfish retaking River Run and then him getting killed. All the different storylines that they just kind of abandoned and just left off in general.
If the House of the Dragon goes well, then maybe you'll get your wish. You'll get a special miniseries.
Well, you know what they say. Be careful what you wish for, just in general. But, yeah, so we got one last stop in the north. Ultimately, it's the scene. We've been dreading it, but we knew it was coming. We just had to get it over with. Of course, Theon is woken up by 2 random girls, doesn't know who they are, immediately suspects foul play. He's like, look, I know this is a prank. Just get it over with, please. But the girls, of course, they don't want to hear that. The one tells the story of, the one Miranda, who obviously we knew will come to later find out is Ramsay's main squeeze, ends up, telling the story about how she used to be a septa, but ended up having other urges. They what's it called? They tied Theon down. Theon is way too weak and malnourished to resist, just in general. As we said, it's his main weakness.
Yeah, well, when they give him the water, just the... just the desperation and the giant gulps and spitting it up and choking, and it's they film the torture stuff really well because kind of is hard to watch, just how desperate Theon is. And the fact is, like, it's, as we know the audience, and Theon should know that it is a trick and we know what's coming. And this whole sequence where, they start targeting, his favorite toy and like, oh, everybody's talking about it. We got to see it, one of these sort of, like a twisted romance scene, like he's trapped in the dungeon and these women are sneaking in. It's like a plot for an adult entertainment scene.
Yeah, pretty much.
Unfortunately, and
basically,
it's
like the most twisted porno of all time, because like the way that it comes out, the way that Ramsay comes out blowing the horn, he's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." It's like, this was so entertaining.
Yeah, but it's the whole thing is, it's not necessarily done in like a tasteless way. It's meant to just show you the mental torture. It's like just what Ramsay's going to go through to make this experience of Theon just unbearable. And the fact is, like, as soon as he blows the horn, like, Miranda and what was the other?
They didn't say the other girl's name, and this is the thing too.
You sure? I think they might have had a name, but I don't quite remember.
What confuses me is I could have sworn that was the same girl that like Ramsay's then hunting with his dogs in the next season, but it turns out that might have been a different girl. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure. They might have just recast the part, but.
Yeah, I think the one actor, not Miranda, but the other one is only in this episode. So must just, go on in, working for the Boltons in some capacity. But the fact is, this scene just immediately goes, to the, okay.
Thank you, Eric. Violet, that's her name. See, this is why. Yeah, Eric, a resident Game of Thrones fact checker.
It's like unfortunately, to reference the Eternals, it's like the Unimind.
Oh God, I was waiting for you to bring that up because we didn't chat with that beforehand, and rightfully so.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, Dom, you put up a review, right, of the Eternals?
I did.
You're going to be talking about it soon?
I did indeed. Yeah, we're going to be talking about it tomorrow night on the channel. And oh man,
gotcha.
Let my review be the one that stands. Let that be like the kind of presentation of my thoughts on that movie.
But anyway, thank you, Eric, for helping us with the Unimind and figure out Violet's name. But hey, this scene basically it's the typical, show us the knife. Show Theon struggling, make the alterations line, and then we're going to dissolve, to black and, leave it open for, the viewer to kind of come up with what exactly happened. Well,
it's funny that you mentioned that because they don't fade to black exactly. They intentionally blur out the shot before they cut to the next scene. I think I gotta check. I think it might be one of the only instances of actually using a blur on this show, but I've definitely seen it in other instances too, where it's like it's a scene that's like usually like pretty too brutal in order to show like I feel like the only other major instance in which this was used was Ned Stark's death, but the difference being is that was a straight, quite literal cut to like the birds flying away, as opposed to like them blurring out the shot. But like still, it's used in order to condone. It's like you're absolutely right.
This is like the Reservoir Dogs effect, right? With the razor blade, it's like you don't necessarily have to see it. The viewer is basically going to come up with like,
in fact, it actually increases the effect by not showing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's listen, I don't want to think about Theon and what he went through. Unfortunately, it's basically the one thing that I do not enjoy from rewatching this show. Yeah. Because, it's pretty much like Theon just goes down a death spiral. And, from the start of the show to the end of the show, he's just going downhill. It's like there's like a minor moment where he redeems,
and then just continues to go down. It's like a toboggan sled.
He redeems himself, but then it's like he basically, jumps on the grenade, so to speak. So it's not much going on for him.
Theon's like Sisyphus trying to push the boulder up the hill, except in this instance, it's like the boulder, instead of just, rolling down and him having to chase after it and push it back up again, it just like rolls down and steamrolls him like every time. Like every single time.
Yeah,
like, that's kind of like what it is.
Yeah, there's really no hope for Theon.
None, none at all.
He's just gonna become Reek soon. I think that's it takes a little bit for that transformation to
yeah, because I gotta check. But if memory serves, I believe that in addition to Jaime and Brienne, this is the last time that we see Theon this season before the finale of this season. But you know who else is also like on a slow downward spiral, although his death comes a lot quicker than Theon's?
I think you're talking about Rob and his
because we
lovely
only get one
wife.
brief stop in with Rob, and like I'm really wondering, like, so we all know that like war movies, they always have this thing where like, okay, the minute that somebody starts talking about their family in a war movie, like, oh man, I can't wait to go home and see them. You know that they're dead. I think that there's that movie that came out a couple years ago, Overlord, which was originally supposed to be in the Cloverfield verse, but then wasn't. Where you had, ironically enough, a Game of Thrones actor, Jacob Anderson, aka Grey Worm, in that movie for literally 5 seconds. Talking about how happy he was that he was going to be able to go home and see his kid before he steps on a grenade. And keep in mind, all these guys are like in a line, like walking like next to each other, and he's literally the only one to step on a grenade and die. So somehow, like, it's like, wow, okay, just the plot mechanics of that alone are kind of insane there, that he's the only one. But like, this scene, like, I'm truly convinced that like this scene in general was the scene that kind of hammered that home for like every plot, pop culture thing going forward, because we talked about like them just hammering down the point of that Rob is going to die by the end of the season, but this scene just solidifies it, where they're stopped in the rain, obviously caught in a rainstorm on the way to the Twins. What is it the Blackfish says? I've seen wet shits that I like more than Walder Frey.
Yeah, exactly. And basically he realizes, he shouldn't have said that in front of Rob's wife. And
the whole thing is that Walder Frey is going to take this as an insult, because he takes everything as an insult because he's 150 years old.
And basically, what is it? So he apologizes to Rob's wife, and essentially she quips back, hey, it's like, I've been, trying to save people that are like dying in my arms. So like, I'm not really afraid of wet shits. And it's like a really good character building. I think, when you say that this entire episode is about character building, you're 100% correct. And even with the phrase are not really in this episode, but right here, Catelyn Stark is complaining like, we can't stop in the rain. We have to do like a forced march. We have to get there. It's Walder Frey is not going to let this stand. Yep. And it's almost like every step of the way, they're a step behind what the Freys are doing.
Right.
And in hindsight, we know what's going on. We know the Red Wedding's happening.
Not just with the Freys, but with the Boltons in this episode as well.
Yeah, and there's a great tie-ins to what's going on, with basically Lord Bolton and Jaime. They have a conversation that really alludes to the Red Wedding, almost like they are sort of on the same page of what the plot is. But and that's one of those things that this show does really well, is like what we see on camera versus what could have been said behind, off camera. Jaime could have been clued in a little more to what's going on, as he's sort of, being transferred back to King's Landing.
Right, but, absolutely. And like the other big thing too, obviously, that comes from this scene is the fact that like obviously afterwards Rob and Talisa have sex, like this, like they're so passionate, they're so in love with each other. The big takeaway is that Talisa's pregnant, and ultimately again it shows that like, oh, they're so happy, they're so in love. Rob's gonna have a son or a daughter or whatever, and it's like it's just hammered home. It's like, yeah, both these people are, in this case all 3 of these people are all dead by now. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really tragic. It's really heartbreaking.
It's a really great scene because, essentially, they have this romantic time, and then he gets up to look at his chessboard and kind of plan the war, but she decides to write a letter to her, her mother. And this is where she decides to, talk about, hey, Rob, will you be willing to travel once the war is over to see my mother, and then also she'll get to meet her grandson, and that's how she sort of spills the the beans, so to speak, with the fact that she's pregnant, and it's just really great scene. It's like, oh, it could be a boy, it could be a girl, it could be both. Don't get too greedy. Like there's a familiarity between the two of them that is really sentimental and really sweet. And it's you got to set this up. You got to actually care about these characters and feel for them before these sort of red wedding happens.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, yeah, there's only one more brief scene in the Riverlands that we check into before we get to Jaime and Brienne and the infamous bear pit scene, which is, of course, the quick Arya scene. I mean, the basic sum of this scene is Arya has finally had enough with the Brotherhood, runs away and gets caught by the Hound. But I do think that there's one interesting tidbit that comes from this scene, even though it is primarily a transition scene, which is where Arya's talking to them, and he's like, come and sit by the fire, and she's like, I don't want to sit by traitors, because she's officially had it. She's mad at them, obviously, for everything that happened, obviously with them bringing her to River Run, and then with Gendry, and them selling Gendry and everything with the Hound in general. She's had her fill with them. But ultimately, this is the final straw when Anguy comes in and says, oh, well, there's a Lannister raiding party. I mean, personally, I just think that's a bad on the Brotherhood. I'm like, I know you need the gold, but like, what is more advantageous to you to pursue this Lannister raiding party or just to get Arya to River Run as soon as possible? I have a slight problem with that, but whatever. Arya's pissed off.
I think the Brotherhood, their whole thing is to basically delay the Lannisters and hurt the Lannisters. And, I think that's one of their predominant missions. They can make money. They can put, sort of the hurt on the Lannisters. And, bringing Arya back to her family, yeah, they'll get some money, but it also takes them away from the, their main mission. And so I think, it's one of those sort of choices that they make. Like, hey, that we get money for this, and it actually accomplishes our mission. And then, hopefully we can turn around and bring Arya and get even more money to kind of continue our mission. The only thing is they didn't account for her to kind of run away. And Arya didn't really account that the Hound was still around,
right.
Basically to, I guess it's a cliffhanger. But
it's absolutely cliffhanger, yeah. But again, it shows that the Hound is definitely smarter than the Brotherhood, because other than taking their sweet time, the Hound actually gets her to River Run at least.
But the biggest for me, the viewers are left to think that the Hound has kidnapped her, and there's going to be hey, anything could happen. The Hound could basically be offended by the fact that she wants to kill him. He could totally just kill her and be done. Obviously, that would be too quick of a plot line.
Right.
But, we're left to think like, oh, man, what is the Hound going to do?
Right.
And the only thing is, what the Hound did for Sansa in King's Landing, that's the only thing that we can hope for, is that he still has, that sense of honor, and he'll do right by Arya. And, I think it's pretty quick that we're shown that what he's going to do. And it's what's the next step? He takes her to the Erie
after a River Run, and then by the time they get there, Lysa's dead too. So, and it's so ridiculous to the point where Arya even cracks up laughing. But
I can't wait for that.
Oh, it's gonna be so good. For me, the big takeaway from this scene is when she's like, they're talking about the red god, the one true god, but Arya's like, that's not my god, and she's like, oh, what is yours? And she's like, death, obviously setting up for her whole journey with the faceless men, obviously in 2 seasons. So I definitely think again, it's like some attempt at plotting for future seasons, even though at a certain point that kind of just goes out the window. But,
I'm amazed at how early they plant those seeds.
Oh, absolutely.
The fact is, season 2, we're meeting the faceless men and the 3 wishes, and now her god's of death. It's all planted. It's all there, and when you can bust it open in the later seasons, it really kind of goes. It's great. Although I don't want to hear the oysters and cockles thing
please,
again.
God, no.
I've heard that enough.
I still have PTSD flashbacks of that happening of the oysters, clams, and cockles. But so now we move into the big centerpiece of this episode, which is of course Harrenhal. Jaime is getting ready to leave. He bids goodbye to Brienne, saying that, who knows when they'll see each other again. Brienne kind of reminds him, actually manages to get him to commit to his vow of, bringing Sansa and Arya home. Ultimately, she leaves with Qyburn. Obviously, he has the conversation with Roose Bolton. Obviously, the conversation that we alluded to before, telling is tell Robb Stark I won't be able to attend his wedding. Tell him that the Lannisters send their regards. You see this look on Roose Bolton's face.
So, that line is 100% even though Bolton has, put Jaime Lannister in his place, it's almost like they had a totally different conversation off camera. probably in private without Brienne there. And it's one of those things where Jamie seems to know a little bit about the plan that's going to happen.
Yes, indeed. And at the end of the day, it's revealed after the fact that Jamie finds out that since Roose has left the castle, that Locke will be left in charge with Brienne there. Obviously, none of them trust Locke, considering that Locke is just super sadistic, arguably even more sadistic than the rest of the Boltons. But he finds out from Qyburn that they ultimately did right her father. Her father did promise a very handsome reward, 300 gold dragons for Brienne. But the fact that Locke felt cheated because he thought that their island was full of all the
sapphires,
all the sapphire mines in the land, and so as a result is keeping Brienne there. Jamie immediately realizes that Brienne is in danger, manages to convince. I love the scene too where he convinces the one guy. He's like, "Okay, look, you work for the Boltons, right? So let me explain to you how this is going to work, right?" And he manages to coerce the guy to get in the back to Harrenhal, to get back to Harrenhal.
Well, it's all about like, hey, you're going to take me to my father, and when we get there. If we don't have Brienne, I basically say you're the person that maimed me. Where if we actually get Brienne and we take her with us, you get to be the hero that saved me and get that reward that you're sort of expecting. Right. So he coerces the guy to be on his side. And this is also there's a great scene where Qyburn is changing the bandage and talks about the corruption and stopping that with the hand. And it kind of sets up the fact that he wants, he did experiments, and that's the reason why he's no longer like a maester. And, essentially his insight, came from these experiments and his willingness to explore. And I think this conversation between Jamie and Qyburn and just having a basic dialogue, and it starts off with like Jamie saying, oh, did you have one too many, boys and whatever, and get caught? And, he basically says, no, that's not my affliction. What I'm into is experimenting on people. So it's Jamie sort of throws this like demeaning joke out there, but at the same time, it evolves into a conversation where, obviously where Qyburn serves Cersei later on, it's sort of the seed that is planted for that relationship to happen.
Absolutely, which is ironic considering the fact that the bulk of the relationship with Qyburn comes from Cersei, not from Jamie. But the interesting thing also that happens here, obviously, is the fact that we see the gross literal representation that the Boltons kind of entrance onto Brienne when Jamie gets back to Harrenhal, which is the literal representation of, their entertainment is they're going to throw Brienne, considering the fact that they all kind of know that they're dead before the end of winter, is they're going to throw Brienne into a pit with an actual fucking bear, which they bring in an actual bear for too. You can absolutely tell. Like there may be a few scenes in the wides where it's CG'd, but for the most part, that is an actual bear. And they gave Brienne a wooden sword.
Yeah, that's the best part when Jamie comes back and he's like, "She's got a wooden sword." And I think Locke is basically his response is, "Well, it's our only bear." And it's such a great line. And
so
Locke is like, "Oh, I thought you were on your way. Why are you back here?"
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where Locke is like, "Too bad." It's like, I don't care about your money. Taking your hand, watching her die. That's what I care about. I don't care about the treasures that you're promising. My enjoyment comes from those things. And Jamie basically jumps into the pit and, puts the loyalty of Bolton's other man who's charged getting him safely to King's Landing. He puts it to the test.
Yep, and it pays off indeed ultimately because they're able to pull her out of the pit, and then at the end, I love his square off with Locke at the end where he's like, "Look, you may be sadistic in this sense, in Lord Bolton's orders, but ultimately, who do you think Lord Bolton is going to care about more, appeasing his crazy right hand man or getting me, his prize captor, back to King's Landing safely for the gold?" He kind of calls his bluff, and ultimately, at the end of the day, Locke is kind of forced to choose between his own sadism and loyalty to Bolton, and he smartly picks loyalty to Bolton in that sense. It's how the episode ends, and it's ultimately like a really fitting end, I think, to obviously an aptly titled episode that just shows it's it's also one of the few instances where like a character like actually did a good deed and like doesn't get brutally punished for it. It's kind of insane.
And they show us this nice like sort of aerial shot, or at least a shot from above of the pit and everybody, and you can see Jamie and Brienne leave, and the sound design is really good because they have the bear give out one last roar before the credits hit, and it's and then hard cut to some really metal music, right?
Absolutely.
Which,
I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's DB Weiss's and Ramin Djawadi's rock cover of The Bear and the Maiden Fair. But I might have to you might have to fact check me on that one. I don't know if that's certain.
It's totally out of place, but hey,
but it's still awesome.
People that create TV shows are going to have some fun, so they threw it in. It
happens, absolutely. So two brief more stop-offs before we end this episode. We have a brief stop-off in King's Landing. Not too much that happens here, just again more so like a couple of transition scenes, obviously transitioning into Tyrion and Sansa's wedding. Tyrion, of course, has to deal with the inevitable fallout from Shay. Sansa, of course, airs her dirty laundry to Marjorie. It's an interesting scene that happens here between Sansa and Marjorie. The stuff that's happened between them all season has been very interesting to say the least.
The scene's well written because they're talking about expectations of what they're supposed to do in this position. And, I think very early on in the conversation, they talk about like learning things from your mother. And, again, there seems to be a lot of, talking about, relationships and, pregnancy and all that stuff in this episode. And the two of them, Marjorie and Sansa, talk about this. It's like, Sansa's like, oh, I'll have to, bear his child, like referring to Tyrion. And, Marjorie's just talking about like, oh, it's like some women like, big guys, skinny guys, whatever. And the fact is, women don't really know until they tried, and then we don't really, have that much time to really explore these things. And Sansa just kind of dumbly goes, oh, how do you know all these things? Did your mother teach you? And it's just the innocence of Sansa's character. Is perfectly written.
Which I think is kind of ironic considering that like Sansa starts off the scene by saying, oh, she's just a stupid little girl with stupid dreams about how she thought things were going to go versus all the brutality and horror that she's seen. And yet she's still kind of like, Marjorie still kind of pulls out those little moments of innocence and naivete, but like she kind of admires them. She almost kind of sees in Sansa a younger version of herself almost. And she kind of feels it like she can like kind of coach Sansa into like approaching some of those things in like a less, and see that like they're not all as bad as they're cracked up to be ultimately. And unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Tyrion when he's trying to explain his situation to Shay, because the thing goes both the other ways where he's trying to. It's interesting here because Tyrion at this point in the show is at this major conflict point between obviously loyalty to himself and what he cares about versus loyalty to his family. And in this instance, he's definitely almost like pulling a little bit too hard for loyalty to his family, where obviously he could just as easily say no, right? At the end of the day, what are they really going to do to him that they haven't done already? At the very least, he's still a use to them. The biggest thing here, though, ultimately is that he knows, at least now, that there's still something in it for him, which is that at the end of the day, he did ask for this in some instance, which is a major control, and he does know that if he goes through with this and marries Sansa, that he will be in control of the North, which is a very powerful
and that's
region.
what the scene with Bronn is. Bronn is basically drinking a bunch of wine, and unfortunately he decides to put these evil thoughts in the Tyrion's head. It's like, oh, you really want to bed the Sansa girl, the Stark girl, whatever. And Tyrion is just like appalled because he knows that's like sort of the expected duty that Tywin, wants. And he also talks about, basically trying to appease people and make them happy. And Bronn's like, well, you could try to make people happy, but the only thing you're going to end up with is you're going to what is it he says? He basically says you're going to be the most liked dead man.
Like, if you keep worrying about what everyone thinks about you, you're going to be the most liked dead man in the kingdom. So that he's like, I don't need you to put evil notions in my head. The ones that are there don't need any help. But he's like, you pay me to kill people who you don't like. The evil notions come free. Again, it's funny because we had so many of those brilliant, amazing little Tyrion Bronn moments in last season that this season they've been so few and far between that you almost completely forgot about them. And then this one moment brings it all back and you're like, oh man, I missed this. You had like the one moment obviously in in the third episode where him and Tyrion were debating like, how did Pod seduce these women? Just in general, like, yeah, that one brief minute of gold there. But yeah, I missed this. Bronn is still one of the absolutely like A tier, God tier characters of this entire show. And yeah, it's just I miss those moments.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing in King's Landing, it's
the Tywin Joffrey scene, which is amazing.
There's that. There's actually a couple things. Like before we go there, I was thinking, basically, Gendry and Melisandre, right? So they're on the boat. They're looking at the remnants of the Battle of Blackwater.
There's a lot of characters that were like previously spread out that just happen to find themselves in the same location, but like have no interaction. It's very interesting.
very short scenes, but it's basically telling Gendry that he's Robert's bastard, and there's power in your blood, etc. The whole Tywin thing is, that scene's great because it's you could see that Tywin's visibly upset that he had to come to the chamber, and Joffrey is complaining like, oh, why do you have the small council meetings in the Tower of the Hand? And it's like, Tywin just has an answer for everything. Hey, it's like, that's where my work is. And, it basically saves me time.
I love the back and forth where Joffrey, this entire scene is Joffrey, which is kind of ironic that Joffrey of all people is bringing up like an actual, like pretty legitimate concern, and Tywin is just dismissing it outright. So that instance alone is just hilarious. But more than that is the fact that this is the first of a couple instances, right? You have the scene that happens later on, obviously in the finale, but the first major instance where Joffrey tries to flex on Tywin of all people, and Tywin, just through his body language alone and with how he characterizes his words, immediately comes up and goes, who's in charge here again? Who's in charge? Let me remind you.
I think the best line is when Joffrey's like, I need to be consulted on these matters. And Tywin just responds, he says that line.
Consulted now. Well, I got one better for you. I will see you. You are being consulted now, and I will raise you. When he says, oh, that's a lot of stairs to climb, and I'm very busy. And Tywin's like, we could arrange to have you carried after he does the slow walk up the steps.
Yeah, it's man. I think the whole scene, like that's the thing about this, is that the nuance in most of these scenes is just well done. And sure, it's not one of those episodes that has like a major arc. Basically the biggest arc we have is Jaime swearing the oath and going back to save Brienne. But all those sort of character scenes really, they took the time to build the world in this episode and get us sort of engaged in a lot of the characters and a lot of the storylines. And I think it's like preparing us for when the dominoes start to fall. Right. And, it's like, the Red Wedding is just around the corner. And I think we're sort of, with this episode, primed and ready to go.
Absolutely, 110%. Like, the only other major thing that I wanted to talk about from the King's Landing sequence is the stuff between Tyrion and Shay, how the seeds seem to be already being planted for Tyrion to, like, be trying to, like, get Shay to leave just in general for a variety of different reasons, both because he cares about her, but also because she is, at this point, like, starting to become a little bit of a hindrance just in his life in general. And he does care for her, even if he can't, like, kind of reciprocate it. And, like, the problem is that he does still try to bring up, like, the idea of them, like, kind of living together off to the side, like, her kind of, like, bearing his bastard children just in general. And she's like, oh, so you want me to have children that will never get to see their father? And she once again brings up the idea of leaving for Pentos, like, because it's really weird, like, how the books characterize this over the show, because the problem is that because of when the wedding happens in the books as opposed to the show, Joffrey's wedding happens while Tyrion is still with Shay, and Tyrion is thrown in jail and has like no interaction with Shay up until the time when he sees her at the trial, versus here, obviously because they have a lot of distance between when Tyrion is made to marry Sansa and the wedding when he is declared guilty of Joffrey's murder. There's a lot of time that happens between those where you still have to have like the moments with Tyrion and Shay in order to kind of remind you, that Shay's still here. And so they obviously, like, they have this kind of subplot that in which Tyrion is attempting to force Shay to leave, and that's almost what factors in and is like the prime motivating factor for her betraying him. But I don't know, like I said, it's really weird and strange. Like, what's kind of your take on that before we move on to the Daenerys stuff?
Hey, listen, some storylines have to be put on the back burner and simmered, and they go on like they're simmering for way too long. And I think this is one of those cases, right? I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's one of those things. You have to be aware that Shay exists. You have to sort of, be surprised that she betrays Tyrion when it happens. So basically it's just like, give her scenes, like make sure that she's seen as relevant. And so they're not going to be necessarily the greatest scenes, but they're going to kind of fit in character wise. And really they're just there to remind the viewer, yeah, she exists. So maybe not the best, maybe not the most exciting, but definitely when she betrays him, it's one of those. It kind of plays into that story arc that leads him to ultimately grab that crossbow and attack his father in the privy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it leads us into our last sequence of the episode. We check back in with Daenerys after taking a break from her last episode in Essos. Daenerys is officially on her second of the 3 slave cities, right? She obviously took over. Obviously, we saw what happened with Astapor in episode 4. Now, where she's at the second of the 3 cities, Yunkai, before she arrives in Marine next season, which will be the focus of kind of like her next sort of expedition for the next couple seasons, ultimately. But she's at Yunkai real quick.
And this is where she flexes.
Yes,
this is
indeed.
like everything we've been waiting for in Daenerys' character. I feel like finally it's here. Hey,
also more towards her madness, quote unquote, in this episode.
There's a hint towards that. Like it's basically like the representative comes in to her camp and brings gold gifts and offers a ship with more gold. Like, hey, get the hell out of here, go to Westeros. And the main thing is Daenerys doesn't want to give, doesn't want to leave without freeing the slaves.
Right. She has kind of refocused on her effort. She's, like I said, this season is all about kind of like the higher ups of the main characters we've been meeting, really meeting and understanding a lot of the commoners. And like I said, the big kind of mirror there is that even though they have yet to really take front and center stage, obviously we spend a lot of time with Jon kind of, taking over as the primary storyline next season, with Daenerys much more so taking front and center fold in season 5, ultimately with her rule over Marine. But this season has like kind of the underlying seeds for both of those arcs, obviously, with those two taking front and center stage in the final 2 seasons. Obviously, Jon with his time in the wildlings, and Daenerys with her expedition to kind of, beginning of freeing the slaves in this season. And now she's at the second point in Yunkai. And again, like I love the kind of opening line here too, which is that obviously Barristan knows that they can easily beat the armies of Yunkai. He knows that the Unsullied are unmatched on the battlefield, but Jorah, ever the strategist, knows that they are way too smart to meet the Unsullied in the open field of battle, and that they're going to hunker down behind their gates, and charging at their gates and overtaking them could be at a great cost to them, and they could lose a lot of Unsullied. And so Daenerys obviously wants to go about it another way. And I think the biggest instance here ultimately is that it's the first major instance where she is using her dragons to her effect. Like she has the dragons out in the open.
In the middle of the conversation.
She has total control over the conversation here.
Yeah, the throwing of the piece of meat just to scare him, brilliant. And then also the fact
when the slaves try to take the gold back at the end, and the dragon scream at them, and she's like, "Oh no, that was my gold right there. You gave it to me as my gift, right?"
Yeah, and just the fact is, hey, it's a gift, it's mine. I'm not giving it back, or and then it's like, make use of my gift, which her gift was. She would spare their lives if they freed the slaves, and allowed them. I think it's give them whatever they can carry in food and items, whatever they can carry. Just like that is what you're supposed to give them. So it's one of those things where she's totally flexing. She's not backing down. We're going to basically go into a conflict here just because she has this mentality that slavery is wrong and I'm not going to stand for it. It doesn't matter if it delays my quest for the Iron Throne. This is the type of ruler I've chosen to be, and she's going to incorporate that in her campaign towards getting onto the throne.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like the other big instance that comes from this scene, too, at the end is, so she says, obviously, the slaver, I forgot the dude's name, but the slaver says, famously, we are not Asapor and Karth. We do have friends here, and they will, ultimately, you will end up regretting this. And Daenerys tells Barristan afterwards, like, oh, he says that he has friends, find out who they are. That's obviously going to clue us in as we're introduced to, like, the bounty hunting troop, or the mercenary troop in the next episode, ultimately. But yeah, the first real demonstration of Daenerys' power play as a ruler, and the first of many awesome instances that we see for her for intimidation, as far as how she's kind of refocused her efforts almost entirely. Before, it was all about getting back to Westeros now and survival. Now it's all about, like, okay, now that I've kind of established myself in kind of this position of prominence, now what can I do in order to kind of, continue my reign and show that I am a power player, ultimately, showing who she is in the Game of Thrones. There's a point that we'll get to, obviously, in the books with a character that Tyrion meets in his journey to Daenerys, in the books, that is completely cut from the show, that ultimately shows the demonstration of this as far as how far Daenerys has come. And I think it kind of meshes really nicely, obviously, with the Joffrey Tywin scene, which is a scene that is exclusively original to the show, but still kind of plays into this whole facet where Daenerys, once again, everybody seems to have forgotten about her with everything that's going on in Westeros as general, but Daenerys is still there, and Daenerys is still very much a force, to say the least, even if nobody still pays her any mind. And that continues to show as the show goes on. So that was it. That was our recap / review of season 3, episode 7, entitled The Bear and the Maiden Fair. Only 3 episodes left of season 3. Only 2 more episodes until we get to the infamous Red Wedding. Pat, thank you so much for being my brilliant, delightful, and insightful co-host, as per usual. Where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
Hey, Tom, basically I'm mainly hanging out here on the, Talkin TV YouTube channel, Talking Thrones with you. I also do have my Instagram account that's pretty cold right now, but at Patrick W. Huber, if you want to go there and help, set up the kindling, maybe I can light it up.
For a second, I thought you were going to make another Amazon reference and pull a Kindle there, and I'm like, whoa, we're not Amazon plugs here, are we?
No, hey, it's maybe if I see a bunch of like a surge in subscribers for a dead account, maybe that will spur me to actually post something on there.
Maybe, we'll see. But ultimately, you can follow me, of course, at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, where I just posted a picture of my fresh new buzz. You guys can go like that there. You can also primarily follow me on the podcast accounts at Talkin TV Podcast, Facebook and Instagram, where I post every single day, twice a day, for all of the stuff that we have going on in the channel. Of course, we also be sure to click the subscribe button, click the like button, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. We'll be back next week for season 3, episode 8, Second Sons. And as always, people, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.
Get more bears, man. One's not enough.
More bears, dude. Oh, man. That gave me nostalgia flashbacks to all the real bears that we used to see. And I think, so real quick tidbit, I think that bear is like the son of one of the more famous bears that used to be in like all like the movies back in like the 90s and early 2000s. I think his name was like Bart the Bear or something like that. And I think this bear was Bart Jr., if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, get more bears. We'll see you guys next time.